So now we're going to be talking about the basic preparations of coatings and stuffings. So in this instance, I'm going to be making a batter, and I'm also going to be making a Duxelles, which is a mushroom-based stuffing. So to do that, first what I need to do is talk you through my ingredients. So to make our Duxelles, which can be used for a whole host of different things, including to make a beef Wellington, you could use it to stuff a tomato, which is what we're going to be doing here. You could also use it on little canapes or on toasts, Melba toasts, something like that. So the ingredients we need to make our Duxelles are butter, shallots, mushrooms, some tomato trimmings, some garlic, and we put a bit of white wine in there as well. So let's start that cooking process. So in this bowl here, I've got 30 grams of butter. That can just go into my pan. Now you can see the pan isn't on a very high heat. It's relatively low heat. We just want to melt the butter without too much colour. We don't want it to burn. We don't want too much nuttiness. And I've also got a relatively small saucepan because I haven't got very many ingredients to work with here. So I don't want a huge pan where the ingredients could burn quite quickly. So once the butter's melted, what we need to do is sweat down our shallots. Now that means to cook them without colour until soft and translucent. I'm just going to turn the heat up ever so slightly, because although we don't want them to burn, we want them to sweat, we also don't want them to boil. So it's quite important to control that heat as you go. So I've got 1 tablespoon of chopped shallot, or 30 grams. That goes into the butter. You can also use a little bit of oil, and half oil, half butter if you're looking to reduce the fat content. So I just want to stir those shallots around in that butter just until they start to wilt and go translucent and nice and soft. As I say, that'll just take a few minutes. And while that's doing, just add a pinch of salt. Salt will help draw the moisture out of the shallots as well, keeping them nice and soft and sweet. Just going to turn that heat up ever so slightly. And the next thing we want to think about adding is our mushrooms. So here I've got some very finely chopped button mushrooms. You could also just use some mushroom trimmings just to utilise all those ingredients within your kitchen. It's really important to finely chop them because the whole idea of a Duxelles is that it's a stuffing. So you don't want it really chunky, you want it to almost resemble a paste once it's all cooked and all the moisture has evaporated out of your ingredients. So we've got double the amount of mushrooms than of shallots. So we had 30 grams of shallots, so I'm going to add 60 grams of our finely chopped mushrooms. So that's quite heaped tablespoons of our mushrooms because they don't weigh very much, remember. So the idea here is that we remove as much of the moisture from the mushroom as possible. And while that's cooking, I'm going to turn the heat down a tiny bit. And I'm going to add some garlic. Now I didn't want to add the garlic too early because garlic burns quite quickly. I'm going to add a teaspoon of garlic, or 5 grams. So just give that a stir around. Again, controlling that heat because you don't want that garlic to burn. And then here I've just got some trimmings from the inside of the tomato, which I've already blanched and removed the centre of, all the pips and the flesh within the centre of the tomato. So they can go into my Duxelles mix as well. Stir those around. Now you can, this is optional, but I've chosen to add just a little bit of dry white wine because this is just going to enhance the flavour in those tomatoes. But of course, if you want to use an alcohol-free wine or just leave it out completely, that's absolutely fine. So I've just sort of added 2.5 tablespoons or so of wine. Right, so the important thing now, turn that heat up because what we want to do is we want to boil off all that alcohol and extract all the moisture from the mushrooms so that we end up with a really nice dry paste. And let's give it a little twist of pepper just for some seasoning. We've already put the salt in there, so you don't need to add any more salt at this stage. You might decide it needs a little bit later on when you come to taste it. So let's leave that there, simmering away. While that's happening, we're going to talk about coatings. Now, we're actually going to be making some apple fritters, and to do that we need to make a batter. So to make a batter, this is going to be a sweet batter, but of course you can have savoury versions, you can have versions that include yeast, you can have versions that are made with beer or cider in this case. So you can really play around with them a little bit, but this is sort of a traditional, very simple, very straightforward sweet batter. So I've got my bowl and a sieve, and I've got 125 grams of plain soft flour. So I'm just going to sieve the flour into the bowl. This is going to get loads of air into the flour, and it's also going to make sure that we remove any lumps. The other thing that I need to add is some sugar. So I'm just going to sprinkle in 25 grams of sugar. You don't need very much, but it will add some sweetness, and it will also help the batter to sort of caramelise while it cooks. So I'm just going to give that a little mix around. And now what I want to do is make a small well in the centre of the flour, and I'm using my whisk, and I'm just going to bring in 300 mils of cider. This is sweet cider. You can also just use cold fizzy water if you wanted to, that will also work. What I want to make sure I do is not add all the liquid at once, because some flours will take a little bit more liquid than others, and also you don't want a lumpy batter. So I'm going to start by slowly adding maybe a quarter. And what I want to do is draw in the flour from the outside of the bowl into the liquid. So as it starts to get too firm to mix, you add a little bit more. And just slowly mix like so. And what the bubbles in the cider will do is help to aerate your batter, making it nice and light and not too stodgy. So again, just draw the flour in from the outside of the bowl in, making sure that you've got no lumps starting to appear. And if you do, just whisk a bit faster. So I don't think I'm actually going to need all of this liquid. You want your batter to sort of be a dropping consistency. By that, I'll show you what I mean in a second. So just give it one really good final mix. I'm just going to check my Duxelles over here, give it a little stir. And you can see that it is starting to dry out, but we're not quite there just yet. Some recipes might suggest that you add some breadcrumbs at this stage. That's absolutely fine. It's your choice if that's what you choose to do. I'm not going to do that with mine. So I'm happy with this batter. It's a nice drop-in consistency. It's going to coat my apples really well, but it's not too thick that it's going to be too heavy, and it's not too thin that it's just going to run off. So you can see I've actually used 100 mils less, but some flours might have taken all of that. So it's really important to use your intuitiveness, and it's really important to gauge things as you cook them, because even though a recipe might say something, sometimes it just needs a little bit of tweaking here and there depending on the ingredients that you're using. I'm just going to move my batter to one side and leave it to rest. Check on our Duxelles again, which is drying out really nicely. But what I want to do is just add a little bit of colour, a little bit of freshness to it. So I've just got some parsley here that I've picked and washed. And all I want to do is just finely chop that. Just so that it's got a little bit of vibrancy to it. So I'm just going to finely chop my parsley, like so. Again, you don't have to use parsley in this recipe, it's choice, but I prefer to do so. Try to remember that all the ingredients within your Duxelles have now cooked down, and you don't have any chunks in there really, so it's important to make sure that the parsley is chopped quite finely. Otherwise you're going to get large chunks of parsley and not much else texture. So try to make sure that everything is the same size, is what I'm trying to say. So that's really nice and finely chopped there. probably even go a little bit finer. Just make sure, just bring the parsley in from all corners of the bench, like so. Get it all in one place and then start going again. I'm happy with that. Clean your knife off, scoop it into one place. Let's have a little look at our duxelle. So now you can see that our duxelle is really nice and dry. So I'm going to turn the heat off. I'm going to add my finely chopped parsley. That's about 1.5 tablespoons. Give it a stir. And importantly, remember to taste it. Check it for seasoning. Make sure everything's balanced, which it is. And I'm going to transfer that into a bowl to leave it to cool. So there you have it. Those are 2 examples of a stuffing and also of a coating.